Well, the families really are the miracle workers everywhere, and well, in a way, of course, they have to bear the brunt of absolutely everything that might come. But I mean, they will also be privileged to have experience of rather surprising things that happen in autism development, and all sorts of fantastic steps. And of course, I find autistic children absolutely fascinating, and I think parents too treasure that what they have there is something very, very special. And all the kind of challenges, of course, are also, I suppose you could say, they are driving some kind of growth and maturity. I mean, they're always sort of putting you to the test. Yes. It's very, very hard. So the challenge is, I think the main difference from maybe other challenges is that it will never stop. It will change, but it will never stop. It continues on, and so you need an enormous amount of stamina, an enormous amount of patience, and I suppose good humor. Yeah. I think the thing that I have observed is that families with an autistic member or with more than one are very, very good at mutually supporting each other, and they really create these networks everywhere. Some work better than others because, again, that needs the extra energy just to maintain them. But that's very, very interesting. And I've often heard they say that, well, we would never have talked to other parents like that. We would never have done that if it wasn't for our autistic children. They bring them together in a very special way. And I think that makes a difference. I've seen incredible changes, really, really amazing changes from the 60s, 1960s to now. And I think on the whole, they're good changes. So one of the things that I find particularly remarkable is that there are, as a percentage, certainly fewer children who don't speak at all and don't communicate at all. It seems to me that there now we have all this sort of educational means and programs, most of them actually done by parents, quite, you know, dedicatedly, not only by teachers. We have those programs maybe to really make a difference to how children learn language and use it for communication. I think that's something that strikes me as a huge progress. It was very, very different from what we saw then. Yeah. We also, I think, know much more about the sort of long-term, you know, life course events and things that go on. So, you know, previously you just saw this child, you said, what on earth will happen when he grows up, when she grows up? Really, we didn't know. It was very, very difficult then. Now we know a bit more. And of course, the new challenge is old age. Yeah. Nobody really knows that yet. You know, I mean, when I started so long ago, the children were really basically all under 10, the ones that I sort of worked with, or maybe under 12. Then they came to the teenage years, and there were quite different problems arising then. And then suddenly we said, well, what will it be like when they're adults? Will they have to be, you know, living in a home, or can they have some independence? Yes, many of them can have some kind of semi-independence. Now, I think, again, it's very important not to be, now to have false expectations, like complete independence. Actually, I think is very rare. It happens. It certainly happens, but I think that sort of continued some kind of support is what seems to work very well. So again, I found that maybe one of the good changes is that support is actually provided. That is on a kind of slightly informal basis, slightly part-time basis. You know, you don't have to have somebody living in a home under constant supervision. Of course, there are so many different cases. I mean, it's this huge rainbow, which we always say that unbelievably different. And some have, of course, a kind of challenging behavior that you really do need that supervision all the time. So we shouldn't deny that that still exists. So I would think it would be very sad if parents were being blamed if they happen to have a child who is really, really very, very severe, very difficult, because, you know, you can't necessarily change that. Yeah. Also, at the milder end, you can do a lot. Well, I've already alluded to that, the old age. I mean, that is just, it really hasn't been done. Can you imagine? We just don't really know what will happen. We do know one thing, I think, from a lot of individual observations, that learning goes on throughout adulthood. It's not like saying, oh, you can only do it, get some skills when you're really very young, you better get it all in the first 20 years. Not so. Seem to be stepwise progress. And the question is, will that carry on in old age? What will happen? You know, could it be that the very good memory that we find in, you know, so many cases, not absolutely all, of course, could then suddenly really come into its own? We're all losing our memory. I'm a good example of that. You know, names go, words go, everything goes. Will that happen in autism, or will it happen in a different way? We don't really know. Actually, I learned just today that in the Northeast, based in Newcastle, this is where a big project on aging is actually going to happen, with a big coordination and also a kind of cohort longitudinal study, which is exactly what we need. We always, you know, we can't necessarily get all the information we want from kind of averages of certain groups, and we say, you know, another average group. If we have the same people, the same families, followed through, that is sort of the ideal situation. And I believe there is a great willingness in the families, perhaps because they have such a good network already, and perhaps because some trust has been built up. You know, things have gone well, people have been getting support and supporting each other. And I would really hope that that would be sort of a thing to build on, to take part in new longitudinal studies, so that we really know what happens. You know, when you look at textbooks, you always see these sort of curves and lines, usually quite sort of straight lines, and then maybe they go down for certain things, and you say, no, this cannot really be true for individual cases. I wouldn't be surprised if in individual cases we get ups and downs and ups and downs all the time, you know, depending on how often we measure something. And that would be very important to know, because you could get quite despondent, couldn't you, if things suddenly seem to stop or get worse. But if you find that that's actually the normal course of time, and it's true for everybody, that would give you a different perspective. Of course, you would also know when you should start to worry. Maybe there are points when you say, normally that would be now a little bit of an upturn here, and it isn't. We don't know about that yet. So that would be really fascinating, I think, to follow up and to know what happens. I think what we really need to know is what happens in everyday life. That's really, I think, the most value. Of course, we need to have also research in the lab where, you know, people have to do these very artificial tests. I've done that all my life. And that gets you so far, you know, usually it gets you towards some hypothesis, and then you say, oh, that could explain quite a lot of things, and then you should try it out, I think, in real life. So does it explain and even predict what's going to happen? That would, of course, be the very best thing of all, that you might have some idea of how to plan. This idea, whether we can take the idea of the autism spectrum so far that it covers absolutely everybody. You know, we can't see any differences. I think this is a very, very difficult question, and I'm by no means, I mean, a lot of people want to believe, I think, that you know, there are only shades and everybody sort of, you know, in some way, you know, we can understand what happens. You know, I'm also thinking we might make have too easy a view, too simple a view if you really do that. I mean, there's no doubt that autism is a spectrum. And on the other hand, I also think that, you know, all of us, you know, neurotypical people, are also on the spectrum. And there could well be this overlap in the middle and you can't really tell the difference. But on the other hand, I think that maybe there are some differences, and I think that would be important to acknowledge. And it doesn't mean that, you know, you wouldn't value a person because they are very different. There's this argument about deficits. Should you say that something is deficit? Well, why not? I mean, I know that's maybe very unpopular, but I think, you know, if you, for example, want to have services and support and all sorts of, you know, acknowledgement of kind of work that's being done, you cannot really argue for them so well if you say, well, these are just slight shades and slight differences, because it would seem in that case that perhaps special education isn't needed and special provision isn't needed.